Good morning, Sakkie. Welcome to this program. I am Anna Marie, and I work under the acronym HOTI, which means our hats off to you, because in 2009, I started teaching businesses how to use social media to market themselves. And for that exercise, we wore hats. And every time the people came, we would take off our hats and say, we welcome you, and we take our hats off to you for attending this workshop. So that is where our HOTI comes from. And I'm very much interested in today's topic, which is about water in Gauteng and in the rest of South Africa. And I've got Sakkie van der Westhuizen here, and I'm going to ask him to tell us briefly about his background, because I do believe that he is authority on water. Thank you, Sakkie. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, Anna Marie. And I'm Sakkie van der Westhuizen, and I've been working in water all my career. I'm a civil engineer, sort of specializing in water. I've been doing planning work. I've been doing design work. I've been doing a lot of construction work in this water world, be it dams, canals, pump stations, pipelines, and or hydropower projects. I have been with the government Department of Water Affairs for a long time. I've been with private sector companies, and I'm currently retired, but I do believe that I have some information to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That is a good background. And I want to just start with our first question. Sakkie, our water usage in Tshwane occasionally becomes a crisis, leaving some of our reservoirs without water, especially in the high-lying areas of Pretoria. And water is very much an issue lately. Can you please tell me where, and the listeners, where our water comes from?
Yes, Anna Marie, the problem of the reservoirs running dry is, of course, a matter of ensuring that there is enough pumping capacity from Randwater and or from Pretoria municipality to ensure that those dams, who are reservoirs, they are storage facilities for water, so that if there's a problem, then you can have the problem solved. But it has to be maintained. It has to be kept full and not empty, as they do run from time to time. But I think it's a very interesting question that you actually ask about where do our water come from? Our water, of course, comes from rain. That, of course, makes people believe that it's got to be free because it comes from the sky. The problem is, of course, that water falls in catchments and it drains down to rivers. And it doesn't rain all the time. There are major infrastructure systems required, has to be built to ensure that that water reaches your tap in your house. And there's a whole series of such infrastructure required. It's not just one simple thing. So just to come back to the catchments, the catchment that is of large importance to Pretoria is, of course, the Vaal River catchment. The Vaal River catchment stretches from Ermelo and as wide as including Delmas, etc. It then runs down to Grootdraai Dam at Standerton. It flows down through Villiers and, in fact, then into Vaal Dam. But the other branch of the system is, of course, the Wilge River that comes from Harrismith. And there's a major dam there, the Sterkfontein Dam. Now, these systems then gets abstracted. The water gets abstracted from the Vaal River system in the vicinity of Vereniging for treatment at this huge, massive, fantastic Suikerbosrand treatment works of Rand Water. Therefrom, it has to be then distributed throughout this whole huge supply area of Rand Water. Pumping, it has to be piped, it has to be put into big reservoirs, and a portion of it comes to Pretoria, or to Tshwane. However, Tshwane has various sources of water themselves. The one is, and the older ones is, of course, groundwater, which is the Fontaine, the Fountains Valley. There's some water coming out of the dolomitic rocks there. And then a little bit more towards Delmas, there's some more water just coming out of the surface of the dolomitic water. Those were the first sources of water. But subsequently, of course, there were some others developed, like the Ritley Dam near Centurion, and dams like, on the systems downstream of Pretoria in the vicinity of Moloto. Those dams have their own treatment works, these of Tshwane. So treated water comes from Rand Water, but water has to be treated in treatment plants in the Pretoria works itself, and there are various of them. Now, this water then has to be pumped or led into the reservoirs and then distributed to the houses. Now, your question initially was the one about the reservoirs. And those reservoirs can only be supplemented from the big river systems, the big dams that gets built from time to time. So this is where our water comes from.
Thank you very much. That's very interesting. So to hear how water gets to our taps, which is quite an extensive process. But there's also something else that I want to ask you, Sakkie. Rand Water, the primary water supplier for Gauteng, is operating at a maximum capacity. But in October 2024, they warned us that the province's reservoirs were critically low, and that Tshwane is exceeding its water license agreement by 18%, with the metro consuming 800 milliliters water per day, while Rand Water has set a limit of 666 milliliters per day. I wonder if you can tell me, why are there limits on water? And I just want to understand, why do we have to have a license? And why are we limited to this water? Sakkie, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I have to start a little bit going back. The thing is that South Africa is fundamentally a water-dry country. It is a country in which it is necessary to have these big dams and big systems to store water in for the drier periods.
Yes.
And to do those calculations, the Department of Water Affairs had done major studies on each one of the catchments and knows how much water is available currently and in the future from those systems. It is not unlimited. It is definitely not unlimited, and one needs additional structures to actually provide that water. In the case of Gauteng and the Vaal River system, the need to develop some dams in Lesotho was very necessary to ensure that there's sufficient water. Now, knowing how much water is available on the Vaal River catchment is important, but it's equally important to know the use of water, the quantum, how much is actually being used. And then you must remember there are not only local authorities, there's some industries, mines, agriculture that requires water. I must immediately add that the assurance of supply, the percentage assurance of supply to farmers is deemed to be much lower, that they can tolerate much of a shortfall in the supply of water to them. However, it's clearly so that households have a much higher or require a much higher level of assurance of supply, even in droughts. The highest in this country, though, is considered to be Eskom. Because if Eskom cannot generate power unless they have water, and therefore there are major systems to ensure that they, and cross-cutting systems to ensure that Eskom has water, Eskom and Sasol, in fact. Now, in that process, it is necessary for South Africa to also do major interbasin transfers, it's called internationally, which means that Tugela water gets pumped up the hill at Harrismith into Sterkfontein Dam, which is then flowing in a completely different direction as opposed to flowing the Tugela water to the Indian Ocean. It flows the other direction. Similarly, Lesotho River water is being pumped across the divide to also flow down the Vaal River system. Now, then to reconcile this availability of water, the quantum available at any particular point in time, you will understand upstream on a river, there isn't that much water. Whereas downstream, there is quite a bit of water, so they must be carefully allocated between the different users, and that is done by licensing. So there's a Water Act that requires licensing.
Yes.
So every user has to have a license, and that license has to be complied with. Now, I think the numbers that you've mentioned between the cities of Johannesburg and Pretoria, for instance, and Rand Water's share in that, is one that says there is an understanding of what the availability of water generally in the river is. And then the license is allocated in accordance, even though it's given to a high assurance. But it is not unlimited. It cannot be dealt with unlimited, simply because there's also a huge lot of wastage of water, unaccounted for water, which includes, for instance, leakages, pipes that's broken, unmeasured water. In other words, stolen also, amongst others, but certainly also supplies to parts without measuring it. In fact, very recently, I've read a report which says that generally, municipal water supplies as unaccounted water of more or less 50%, which means that there's an allocation, but it is not being complied with. The maintenance is not being done. And the department cannot simply allow this to continue. So there must be a limit, and that limit has to be enforced. It's got to be fixed. The problem fundamentally has to be fixed. I'm not too sure whether I've answered the question adequately.
I do understand, and I do understand now that the problem is actually infrastructure maintenance in the big cities, and that is chewing up a lot of water, and we would not have had water crises if those infrastructures were maintained properly. That's my little bit of logic here. I don't know if I'm right, but if 50% of the water is unaccounted for, then it sounds like it's going somewhere, and it's maybe running down the streets of Pretoria and Johannesburg.
Yeah, you're right in that sense. I mean, let's just understand that generally, normally, one would be able to accept almost even 20% of the quantum to be leaked. Now, this one is now 50%. But there's a flip side to this coin, which is equally important. And that is that if it's unaccounted, it means there's no income stream coming from 50% of the water. Be it that it's stolen, or be it that it's simply leaking, or be it that it's being given to people who doesn't pay for that water.
Ah,
And now if you don't have that income stream, you have a problem in the maintenance of it. And this is then immediately a part of this reason why reservoirs in Pretoria runs dry, and then people don't get supplied. And it's not only Pretoria that way. It is certainly in Johannesburg precisely the same thing. Right now, one has that problem that there's not enough money to fix the problems. And one of the reasons why there isn't enough money is because it's unaccounted water. It was never issued on an account to a user.
that creates a huge problem that the cities really have to give attention to, because if the cities doesn't get the money in, they can't pay Rand Water, and then Rand Water also needs to keep up their infrastructure. It's not just the city's infrastructure, it's also Rand Water infrastructure. So it's a problem that affects both sides.
It is not just two sides. Can I just quickly explain that
Yes.
these water use licenses are issued by the Department of Water Affairs, and they have a raw water tariff, which is a tariff which has to be paid by the person taking that water, be it Rand Water or be it any one of the cities or towns, wherever they are. So there's a raw water tariff. That raw water tariff has to supply the money to build even the Lesotho Highlands project schemes. That raw water tariff includes the royalties that we have to pay to Lesotho as part of the agreement we have with them. That equates, and of course, sorry, just let me continue that a little bit further.
Yes.
This is Water Affairs' stream of income, and if it doesn't get paid to Water Affairs cannot build those schemes in Lesotho. They cannot build the schemes in the rest of the country. They simply don't have the money, and that is the current situation. Now, the next level is, of course, Rand Water. Rand Water pays or should pay for that water, and then they should have an income stream from the people being provided with water. And similarly, the municipality has to have an income stream to be able to maintain and operate the systems in the towns. And this whole thing crumbles. It's like a downward cycle, which will never be able to be turned around unless it's being attended to. And a lot of this happens to Eskom as well. They don't get paid. How can they operate the system? Similarly, Rand Water, if they don't get paid, how can they operate the system? Sorry, that's the point.
Thanks, but that brings me to my next question, Sakkie. It's water royalties more than doubled in 2024. The previous monthly royalty was about 130 million, but it more than doubled after a recalculation agreement by Lesotho in South Africa, and this was in March 2024. I also understand that these figures represent the total royalty South Africa pays to Lesotho and are not specifically broken down per province, such as Gauteng. However, since Gauteng is one of the main beneficiaries of water from the Lesotho Highlands water project, a significant portion of these royalties can be attributed to the province's water consumption. So this was actually news to me when I heard that royalties must be paid for water. Can you please tell me why it more than doubled in 1 year? I'm not an expert on water, and that's exactly why I'm asking this question. Thank you, Sakkie.
Yes, I think what's important in this discussion is that first of all, the Minister of Lesotho and the Minister of Water Affairs came together in November, not November, earlier in 2024, and they've agreed in principle that there has to be a revision of the agreement, which was originally the treaty that was dealt with between South Africa and Lesotho for this water supply. Now, the reports on that discussions was actually based on the principle that a committee will be established to determine what will the actual changes be to that agreement, amongst others, the quantum of the royalties that has to be paid. But if I could go just a little bit back to how that treaty was put together, is that prior to the treaty, a joint study was done between Lesotho and South Africa. And there were World Bank involvement in this as well, because they were deemed to be the loan providers. So there were two basic schemes, which at that point in time was costed. So just fully developed, well, not built, but I mean just fully planned and quantified for the construction of it. The one scheme was, if we wait for the water to simply flow out of Lesotho, near Alawal North, we can take that water free. This is international agreement. It comes onto your land, you can use it. However, once again, the infrastructure required to get that water into your taps is major. You have to pump uphill all the way from Alawal North and build long pipelines and build extensive canals. And then you must remember you have to pump, and therefore you have to quantify that pumping costs over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So that scheme was costed. And then a scheme, which is the Lesotho Highlands project, as it stands at this point in time, was planned and costed. The cost difference between those two fundamental schemes were used to determine the royalties, sorry. And 50% of that cost difference was allocated to Lesotho. That was the agreement. Everybody agreed with that. And this is where the royalties comes from. Now, the scheme that at that point in time was designed for Lesotho was designed to provide 77 cubic meter per second of water flowing into South Africa. Now, let me just quantify that a little bit. 77 cubic meters a second is more or less 5 huge swimming pools filled every second of the day. 24 hours, 365 days a year, that quantum could be taken from Lesotho.
That's a massive amount of water every second.
Yes, yes. And this is the importance of having such a scheme, is that you can supplement the waters in the Vaal River system with that quantum. And what's important about that as well is that this design of the scheme was such that you can have that water without pumping a drop.
Wow.
The design by the engineers was such that Katsi Dam, which is the main source of water from Lesotho, Katsi Dam was built at 2,000 meters. Johannesburg is more or less 1,000 meters above sea level. So that's 2,000. And that's just about enough. The dam was placed in such a position there's enough head for the water to flow free and flow down the hill and eventually into the Bulger River and flow right into Vaal Dam without pumping a drop. So there's no electricity involved in that at all. So the savings for South Africa is massive, being able to get that massive quantity of water through the system and into the Vaal River. Now, maybe I should have said this earlier, but looking at the history of South Africa, one has to appreciate that Johannesburg and Gauteng predominantly developed around the Gold Reef. So the Gold Reef running right through the center of Johannesburg. and this is where the gold reef surfaces, of course, was determining the future for South Africa. But the rainfall is such that there's not sufficient water at all. I've met so many Australians which said, you know, your country is built the wrong way around. Large cities should be by the sea so that there's a big catchment and a big area which can drain down to the rivers, and in Europe as well. Cities were built next to rivers, which were big, so that they have water. Here, the city was built because there's a gold reef. And there are very good reasons for that. But now you have to bring water from afar to put in the taps for the water, for the people.
Okay.
So this is then the history behind the tantima or the royalties.
Yes, yes.
But now, after the scheme has been operational for 25 years, it is necessary to reconsider this whole agreement, this treaty between South Africa and Lesotho. And in the treaty, when it was originally signed, it is acknowledged that there are various reasons why one would be reconsidering it down the line. The first reason is that there were no measuring stations in Lesotho to be able to guide or help the planners to plan for the quantity of water which would be available at any point in time.
Mm.
Very soon, we started building such measuring weirs in Lesotho. In fact, I was much involved in the one that's immediately downstream of the dam that's currently being built there, Polyhardy Dam.
Okay.
So using improved hydrological information, all the parameters inside this agreement actually changes. In fact, by now, there was already agreement that the next dam after Polyhardy will not be Mashai Dam. It will be this Polyhardy Dam, which will be built. And they're currently busy doing that. It's happening, and it will supplement another 15 cubic meters per second. And now we know that that is maybe sort of 3/4 of a swimming pool per second just from that one dam. And that water then would be flowing into the Vaal River system. Now, coming to the second part of your question, that water that runs down the Wilge River into the Vaal Dam is never cannot be separated from the water availability in the Vaal River basin.
Okay.
It is water that gets transferred from one basin which would have run down the Orange River. And it gets transferred upstream into Vaal River so that it can be used there. And then the licensing system takes that water and allocates that water at the cost that it costed to get the water there at any point in time to the various users, the mines, the industries, the local authorities, even the farmers. So every bit of it increases by the quantum of the money that it's costing. Does that
Now,
answer your question?
yes, but I want to ask another question here, because in October last year, I attended the Rand Water Imbizo on the East Rand. And they were then planning to do some maintenance. And I wonder if you could perhaps tell us what maintenance they did and exactly why there were no water in the Vaal Dam in late last year at one stage. Was that because of the maintenance being done that no water came into the dam? There were rumors going around that we're going to get to a point where there will be no water in our taps. Can you please explain to me more about that? And was that threat real? So please help us here.
I mean, maybe I should start with your last question and then go back to the initial one. I think once again, seeing this as an catchment management system. In other words, with the various sources of water flowing into the system.
Mm.
Waldam, of course, became more and more empty and down to something like 24%, I think, due to the fact that some 40 cubic meters per second of water wasn't flowing into it as well. You know, the water that comes from Lesotho Highlands. And currently that's around about 40 cubic meters a second, which is also a massive quantity of water.
Is that
Now,
is
sorry?
that because they were maintaining, did some upgrading? Why didn't it
I'll,
flow?
I'll come to you just now. So that water wasn't flowing into Waldam. So certainly it dropped faster due to that. But at the same time, I must tell you that Waldam is a huge, big evaporation dam. It's got a huge, big surface. It's got a surface of 866 square kilometers of water, which of course evaporates a lot. Therefore, the whole operating policy around Waldam would be to drain Waldam as low as possible to limit that evaporation. Especially if you know that Sterkfontein Dam, sitting near Harry Smith, is absolutely chock-a-block full. And currently it still is chock-a-block full. Reason being that it's a deep dam. It's a dam with a small water surface and is not evaporating fast. So it's much wiser to keep water in Sterkfontein and release it by the opening a valve into Waldam when required. Now, the last time the Waldam was this low, it went down to 12% before Sterkfontein water was released into it. I suspect that Waldam is currently around about 70 or even maybe 80%. So that drama is gone. It's not there anymore. But there wasn't a drama at all because Sterkfontein Dam had a lot of water in it. And to now start increasing tariffs and increasing the level of restrictions on the systems in Johannesburg and Pretoria was not necessary. It is not necessary. It's nothing like the situation that was in Cape Town where the dams were empty some years ago, and there were no alternative to supply the water from. So in this case, certainly there wasn't a need to impose restrictions, and especially not higher tariffs, which comes with restrictions. But let me go to your first question.
Yes.
The reason why the maintenance on the system of the Lesotho Highlands was necessary, and certainly it's not Rand Water doing that maintenance, it is the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, which is the joint venture between South Africa and Lesotho, and also the Trans-Caledon Tunnel Association, or TCTA, yeah. And the TCTA did the upgrading and repairs to this tunnel. Now, where does the tunnel go? The tunnel starts in Katsi Dam, which is the main source of water in Lesotho. Okay. There's an outlet tower in it. Then there's a 30-kilometer tunnel that was bored through the mountains, very deep underground, which goes to a location called Muhela, and that's a hydropower station for Lesotho. So this is still in Lesotho. So Lesotho then generates power, which is virtually sufficient for all of Lesotho. The water therefrom flows into another tunnel, and that tunnel surfaces and comes out just to the north of Clarence. From there, it flows into the Ash River. The Ash River is simply converging into the Wilge River and flows through to Waldam. So that tunnel had been operating for 25 years. It's been inspected every year. and noted precisely where some deterioration or whatever was actually happening. But the repairs only got done in this 6 months period as from October 2024 and March, end of March 2025. And this is the reason why that water wasn't flowing into Volda. But it should not affect, or it did not affect, any of the users of the water in Gauteng. Sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but that's the fact.
That's interesting. Thank you very much for that. But then I need to understand too, why did the municipality in Tshwane say that municipal swimming pools must not be filled? Do you perhaps have any idea why they would say such a thing, or why would they impose such a thing on the city?
I am speculating because I haven't seen or heard the reason presented by Tshwane for doing that. I just had a lot of friends that were really moaning terribly about the fact that these Olympic level or standard swimming pools were not available for practicing, for getting ready for huge events, sporting events. I understand that all the swimming pools were simply emptied. Now, I'm not too sure how much damage is caused by emptying those things, but the only offset I can think of, which could be the reason why Tshwane did this, is that, of course, swimming pools leak, and it's a fact, a leak. And some of the pipes around that could also maybe leak. Then the surfaces of these dams are huge, so maybe they evaporate a lot. And this is an attempt, it may be, that Tshwane made towards curtailing that unaccounted for water, because that's typically the type of unaccounted water I talked about earlier. But I'm not sure, to what extent this would affect the tourism or the people of Tshwane. Mm.
Yeah, it affected the swimming, shall we call it industry, the sport. That impacted them badly because some swimming pools are being used by coaches, and people have to train right through the year for Olympics, for major swimming events. So those people couldn't train, and the coaches couldn't earn their living during that time. But we are approaching the end of a period of water restrictions that Rand Water implemented from October to March 25. Are we going to go through such a period of restriction, water restriction, in the near future? And will there then be enough water for Tshwane? Can we not increase the water, or is this now all related to payments? Because I believe that we get a certain amount, we've got a license for a certain amount of water. Can we not increase that license so that we can get more water? Because after all, we have more and more people moving into Tshwane that need water. And I know one of the issues that we have here is that we have 500 squatter camps that also need water. So, and the government promised that everybody will have water. So I wonder if you can please help me a little bit with this one.
Yeah, I will be, sort of venturing here on uncertainties, because to see in the future how the rainfall would happen, and some of the other uncertainties around this. I reckon that we are actually in a rather wet phase hydrologically in South Africa, and particularly also here in Gauteng. If you have this much water in Vaal Dam as you've got, and most of the other dams in this vicinity, and I think the dams in Tshwane certainly spills at this point in time, then there's probably not really a need to it. But however, one has to bear in mind that the assurances in a water poor country has to be higher. You have to make provision for some prolonged droughts. So going beyond or allowing more water is not very probable, especially if the numbers shows that maybe there's 50% unaccounted water in most municipalities. The only way that water affairs can possibly deal with this then and prevent further investment in infrastructure is by saying that the municipalities has to fix the problems. And will probably, I'm speculating a bit, but will probably not easily allocate more water to a city which has a 50% unaccounted water situation.
So the cities have to get their ducks in a row and get the finances in and not be in arrears with Rand Water, because I think that could be also a part of the problem.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I must use this word account again. If there's some accounts for water which brings money in and actually gets paid, then all the things fall in place again. Currently, we are in a bad situation. There's not money coming in. Yet the services are being provided. And then sometimes the services don't get provided and people get very upset about that, quite understandably. But the problem is to ensure that the money comes in. It is to ensure that people that use this water pays for water, which then improves the account and allow the municipality to improve their services and or maintenance.
Sure. That's quite a lot of information, but thank you so much for joining us and telling us more about water. We'll most probably have a conversation like this soon, and it's very informative. Thank you so much for your time.
I thank you. Have a nice day.
Okay, you too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.